Welcome back to the deep dive. We're continuing our journey through the updated rules of sailing for 2025-2028. And today we are tackling a rule that can make or break your race. Rule 18, mark room. Specifically, we'll be focusing on section 18.2, giving mark room, because let's be honest, those moments around the markers are where the real action and sometimes the arguments happen.
You're absolutely right. Those mark roundings can get intense, and that's why understanding these updates is crucial.
Okay, so for anyone just joining us, these rules govern sailboat racing globally, and they get a refresh every 4 years by World Sailing.
Right.
It just goes to show that even a sport as old as sailing is constantly evolving. We've already covered a lot of ground in previous episodes, going over the definition of mark room itself and digging into section 18.1 when Rule 18 applies.
Right.
But if you're new to this deep dive, no worries, you can always catch up on those episodes later.
Yes, and remember, these changes aim to do three key things. Make the rules more intuitive for all sailors, clarify exactly when Rule 18 comes into play, and promote safer racing by discouraging those last-minute maneuvers that can lead to contact.
So less chaos, more clarity, and hopefully fewer protests.
Yes.
Sounds like a win-win for everyone.
Yeah.
Today we're focusing on section 18.2, and I've got to say, just reading through this, it's already much clearer than the previous version.
Absolutely. And that was a major goal with these updates.
Oh.
They wanted to make the language more user-friendly, using terms sailors are already familiar with.
Let's jump right into 18.2a. It seems like this is the rule you'll be using most often when you're out there on the water.
Yeah.
What stands out to you?
Well, 18.2a is all about who gets priority at the mark, based on two simple scenarios.
Okay.
It's like having a clear roadmap for those close encounters.
Okay, I like where this is going. Break it down for us.
Imagine you're racing, and two boats are overlapped as they approach that zone around the mark. In this case, the outside boat has to give the inside boat enough room to round the mark safely.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
It's all about establishing that inside position early.
Exactly. Now, let's say you're approaching the mark, and you reach that zone before another boat, but you're not overlapped.
Okay.
Guess what?
Right.
You have the right of way, and the other boat, even if they end up overlapping later on, has to give you mark room. It's all about who gets to the party first.
So whether you're overlapped or not, if you're in the zone first, you're in the driver's seat.
Yes.
That's a great way to think about it.
It is. And there's another crucial point in 18.2a.
Okay.
Once a boat is required to give mark room, they have to keep giving it, even if the overlap changes or a new one pops up.
Okay.
That obligation continues as long as Rule 18 applies.
Right.
No sudden moves or trying to shake things up once the dance has begun.
Got it. Consistency is key.
Yeah.
It's like you said, a roadmap. You have to follow the route.
Exactly.
Okay. So we know who has to give mark room.
But when does that obligation actually end?
That's where 18.2b comes in, and it's pretty clear cut.
Okay.
There are two scenarios where the obligation to give mark room ends.
Okay.
First, if the boat that's entitled to mark room, the one who had that inside position, decides to pass head to wind, the other boat is off the hook.
Right.
They've given you enough space to make your move.
That makes sense. They're no longer rounding the mark in the same way.
Right.
So what's the second scenario?
The second scenario is pretty simple. If the boat that's entitled to mark room sails out of the zone,
Okay.
once they're out of that special area around the mark, Rule 18 no longer applies and they're on their own.
It seems like the rule writers really tried to make this section as unambiguous as possible.
They did, and I think it's a huge improvement.
Okay.
Less room for interpretation means fewer arguments on the water.
Okay. We've covered who gives way and when that obligation ends.
Right. But sailing isn't always black and white, right? What about those trickier situations where 18.2a doesn't quite fit the bill?
That's where 18.2c comes into play.
Okay.
Imagine two boats are overlapped, but 18.2a doesn't tell us who needs to give mark room. In these specific scenarios, 18.2c steps in and says, the outside boat must give the inside boat mark room. It's like a default setting to maintain consistency.
I can see how that would make things less chaotic.
Exactly. And this emphasis on the outside boat giving way helps prevent collisions and promotes a more orderly flow around the mark.
All right, so we've got our basic rules and our default setting.
Yes.
What else do we need to know?
Well, there are a couple of specific scenarios where the usual inside boat gets mark room rule doesn't apply. These are outlined in 18.2 des, and it's designed to prevent those aggressive tactics we were talking about earlier.
Okay, this sounds like it's getting interesting. You mentioned aggressive tactics. What exactly does that mean in this context?
Imagine a boat trying to sneakily gain an inside overlap at the last second. or cutting things too close to the mark to force the other boat into a tough spot.
Okay.
18.22 DEST is designed to prevent that.
Right.
It covers two specific maneuvers where a boat might try to take advantage. 18.2D says that in these two scenarios, if the outside boat hasn't had a reasonable chance to give mark room from the moment the overlap began, then the inside boat can't just claim mark room.
So you can't just barge in at the last minute and expect everyone to get out of your way.
Exactly.
It rewards strategic positioning and encourages everyone to sail cleanly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got most of 18.2 covered.
Right.
What's left?
The last piece of this puzzle is 18.2E, which deals with those he said, she said moments on the water.
Yeah.
Those super close calls where it's not clear if an overlap was established properly or broken in time.
Right.
It's basically a tiebreaker.
So like a VAR review for sailing.
Exactly. And in these cases, the rule gives the benefit of the doubt to the boat that wasn't trying to force the overlap.
Right.
So if you're going to claim an overlap, you better be absolutely sure you have a strong case.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It puts the responsibility on the boat making the claim and hopefully prevents some of those unnecessary protests.
Right. Ultimately, it encourages clear sailing and communication, which is something we should all strive for.
Okay. I think we've got a pretty solid understanding of how these rule changes affect who gives mark room and when those obligations begin and end.
Yeah.
But how does all of this translate to your actual racing strategy out on the water?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Knowing the rules is one thing,
Right.
but applying them in the heat of the moment is where the real skill comes in.
Exactly. So let's say you're out there on the race course, the wind is whipping through your sails, and you're approaching a mark with a bunch of other boats vying for position.
Yeah.
What's going through your mind?
First and foremost, situational awareness is key.
Okay.
As you approach the mark, you need to constantly be scanning the scene,
Right.
taking in information about the other boats, the wind, and of course, the mark itself.
It's like a 360-degree view of the playing field. You
Yep.
need to know where everyone is and where they're going.
Precisely. And a big part of that is understanding the zone.
Okay.
Remember, that's the area around the mark where Rule 18 comes into play.
Right.
You need to know when you're entering the zone and when other boats are entering the zone.
So it's not just about getting to the mark first. It's about understanding how these zones affect the rights and obligations of each boat.
Exactly. And once you've got that situational awareness, you can start making strategic decisions.
Right.
Are you overlapped? Who reached the zone first? Based on those answers, you can determine if you're obligated to give mark room or if you're entitled to receive it.
It sounds like there's a real mental chess game happening here.
There is. And the more you practice and visualize these scenarios, the better you'll get at anticipating what other boats might do and making those split-second decisions.
Okay, so let's say you've assessed the situation and you realize you're the one who has to give mark room.
Hmm.
What's the best approach?
Clarity and decisiveness are crucial.
Okay.
You need to make your intentions clear to the other boat, and you need to do it early.
Okay.
No sudden swerves or last-minute dives.
So no trying to sneak in or squeeze into a space that isn't yours?
Exactly. Remember, these rule changes are all about encouraging smooth and predictable rounding.
Right.
Give the other boat plenty of space to maneuver, and don't put yourself or anyone else in a dangerous situation.
It sounds like good communication is just as important as knowing the rules themselves.
Absolutely. You can often avoid a potential conflict just by hailing the other boat,
Right.
letting them know what you're planning to do.
Right.
It's all about good seamanship and sportsmanship.
I like that. It's not just about winning at all costs.
Right.
It's about racing safely and respecting your fellow competitors.
Exactly.
Okay, let's flip the script. Now you're the boat that's entitled to mark room.
Okay.
What's your strategy?
First, make sure the other boat knows you're there,
Right.
and you're entitled to that space.
Okay.
Sail a clear, predictable course. Don't make any sudden movements that could catch them off guard.
And if the other boat doesn't give you the room you're entitled to?
Then you have a decision to make.
Okay.
You can try to avoid contact by altering your course, or you can stand your ground and potentially file a protest.
And that's where things can get tricky, right?
Protests can be time-consuming and stressful,
Right.
and they often take the fun out of racing.
Hmm.
That's why it's so important to understand these rule changes
Mm-hmm.
and to sail with good judgment.
Right.
The goal is to avoid those situations altogether.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to emphasize one final point. Knowing the rules is just the first step. The real skill lies in being able to apply them correctly,
Yeah?
make quick decisions under pressure, and sail with good judgment and sportsmanship.
Well said. It's about taking all of this knowledge and transforming it into confident action on the water.
Right.
And that's what makes sailboat racing such a challenging and rewarding sport.
It's a constant learning process. There's always something new to discover, a new situation to analyze, and a new way to improve your strategy.
Exactly. And that's what keeps us coming back for more. So get out there, practice those mark roundings, study these rules, and never stop learning.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Rule 18. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the world of sailing.